What's up, witches? I'm your host Emma, and you're listening to the True Crime Witch podcast, where I'll discuss everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. Good evening, and welcome to the True Crime Witch podcast, episode 3, Anthony Arkwright. So, Anthony Arkwright is a English mass killer who went on a 56-hour killing spree that left the town where he lived in Yorkshire completely shaken. So Anthony Arkwright was born sometime in 1968. There are no official accounts with his date of birth stated, but I think once we get into the case, you'll see that his date of birth is a detail that's not so important, and it's okay if it's overlooked. So he was born in Wath upon Dearne. I hope I'm saying that right. Jesus Christ, I hope I am. Which actually sits somewhere between Rotherham, Barnsley and Doncaster in South Yorkshire. So I'm from Sheffield in South Yorkshire, and there are like Rotherham, Barnsley, Doncaster and like loads of other little townships, I guess, like this. It's pretty common to have tiny cute little townships like this. Obviously you have Sheffield, which is your like main city, I guess. Then you have like Rotherham and Barnsley, and Doncaster's okay, but So Arkwright was one of 5 children. I'm not sure if he was the oldest, he was the youngest, what sort of birthing order he was in. Again, that's a detail that probably doesn't really matter considering the case. So all of the 5 Arkwright children were actually abandoned by their mother. So Anthony subsequently spent most of his early life into his childhood, teenage years, in and out of different care homes, which in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, there are really, really amazing care homes out there. There are amazing care workers out there. Thank you. You guys are amazing. You do an extremely hard and thankless job, but sadly there are care homes, facilities and workers out there who really don't care, and these kids have a really, really hard time. So his father worked as a miner, which was a pretty common job for anyone living in the Yorkshire area. If you're from the Yorkshire area, from the north of England, even if you're from the UK or whatever, you'll know about how important mining was to us in our infrastructure, stuff like that. So the mines actually started to close from the 1970s onwards. We had a massive miners' strike. I could completely ramble about the consequences of closing the mines, etc. and stuff, but not important to this case. All that's important to note is that if his father was a miner, he would have obviously lost his job or taken a massive pay cut. So that's more than likely why his father couldn't have looked after him. If he even had contact with his father, maybe his mother was bringing them up and she just couldn't look after them. It's unknown a lot about his parental background. So understandably, Arkwright didn't really do very well in school, mostly because his most important developmental years were spent in care homes without a real strong parental guidance, sense of family, love, the adult guidance that a child needs. It's unfortunate. So his poor education, as so often does, led him into a life of crime, mostly petty crimes such as theft and setting small fires. And I believe that if there had been an intervention at this point, obviously due to the time, the era that this happened, this wasn't a common thing to intervene. Not so much nowadays, where we are able to recognise and pick up on children who are struggling. Maybe they show early signs and we can intervene and really change the lives of these kids, but sadly that just wasn't the case for Arkwright. So for his petty crimes, he was sent to a Borstal camp, which is a youth reform centre which is run by HMP From here, I'm going to refer it to HMP. It's Her Majesty's Prisons. It's the prison system in the UK, which is titled under Her Majesty's Prison, and I'm sure she has nothing to do with the prison system. So basically, the idea of Borstal centres or Borstal camps is to rehabilitate young people, to sort of take them away from that life of crime, teach them discipline, respect, give them the life skills that they need, Borstals, unfortunately, have quite a bad reputation as far as they go, cruel punishment, abuse by those who were forced to attend them. You didn't really get a choice whether you wanted to go to a Borstal camp. You were sort of just like, you're going to Borstal camp, enjoy. They were quite harsh within their rehabilitation methods. They would make them do sort of like army sort of tasks, not tasks, but like to teach them discipline and stuff like that. But anyone up to the age of 23, before Borstal camps were closed, they could be sent to a Borstal camp. So I don't really think it's appropriate to be subjecting young children to such harsh punishment routines, etc. That's not going to rehabilitate a child. That's probably just going to cause them more issues when they already have a lot of issues themselves. So anyway, there are also rumours about Arkwright being from an incestuous relationship, which might actually explain why we don't know too much about his parents. We don't know his mother's name, or as far as I researched, I couldn't find his mum's name or his dad's name for that fact. I guess it just went unreported. Again, though, take what I've just said with a pinch of salt. I did read this in a newspaper, which in Britain, and pretty much all across everywhere, is our main source of information. But as we know, British tabloids, any tabloid newspaper, they're all shitbags. So they do often perpetuate and stretch and expand the truth, and they lie, and so just take that with a grain of salt. That's all I'm saying. So at 21, Arkwright had actually managed to gain some normality in his life, whatever you could call normality for someone who obviously had such a terrible upbringing. So after his time at Borstal camp, he started working at a scrapyard when he was 21 in Mexborough, South Yorkshire, which I believe is just outside of Doncaster. Could be wrong. It's in South Yorkshire. I know that for a fact. So he worked there for a while, but he was given the sack. He was fired when he sort of just didn't turn up for work that often. Again, he clearly had a lot of deep set issues, the guy. So it was actually his dismissal from work on the 27th of August 1988 that would be the trigger for his 56-hour killing spree, which would leave the town of Wath upon Dearne completely shaken from their false sense of security and safety. So on that day, 27th of August 1988, Arkwright travelled from Mexborough to Wath upon Dearne, which is about 2 miles away. Wouldn't have taken too long if he had a car or public transport. It's not stated. I'm guessing public transport in South Yorkshire. The public transport's pretty decent. So when he arrived in Wath, he went to his granddad's house and he proceeded to stab his own grandfather, 68-year-old Stasis Padukis. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I believe it's Greek. I apologise. Anyway, so after the initial attack by his own grandson, Arkwright, Padukis was left paralysed and completely defenceless. Arkwright then grabs his own granddad's body, drags it onto the allotment, which I assume was maybe at the bottom of the garden or something like that. If it was a small distance away, how he managed to drag his own granddad's body while he was bleeding without anyone noticing was completely beyond me. So Arkwright pulls his granddad into the allotment, throws him into some random shed, and it was here that Arkwright used a 6.4 kilogram lump hammer to cave in his granddad's head, and this crushed his skull. So there is a huge amount of rage and anger in this attack. It's a very, I don't want to say crime of passion, but it seems that Arkwright was building up this anger either towards his granddad or towards someone for a very, very long time, and then it just so happened that, you know, the day he got sacked on the 27th of August just happened to be, boom, the trigger that just set it all off. So following this awful savage attack on his own grandfather, Arkwright just nonchalantly goes on a pub crawl around Mexborough, you know, like you do, like it's a Friday after work and, you know, we're gonna go drinking with the boys. So he had somehow managed to completely compartmentalize this in his own head, which shows some sort of level of premeditation, but I guess he just snapped. But he just couldn't keep it to himself what he'd just done, and to anyone who would listen in the various pubs that he visited, he would, you know, brag saying, oh, it's been murder on the allotment today. Like, he was proud of what he'd done. Like, he was just so proud of himself. So I guess the argument that he just snapped and lost it, you could use that. But the fact that he was just bragging and laughing and, you know, really, really trying to get people's attention on him, to me, that shows that he had no conscience. He really didn't give a shit that he just killed his own granddad. You know, he just didn't care at all. To him, this murder was nothing. It was like he'd just taken the dog for a walk and then gone on the pub crawl. Apart from he hadn't just taken the dog for a walk, he'd caved his own granddad's skull in with a 6.4 kilogram lump hammer. So make of that what you will. So Arkwright's second victim, which there is some uncertainty and discrepancy around this, but for the purpose of the podcast, I'll refer to this as his second victim. It was actually his grandfather's housekeeper, who was 73-year-old Elsa Cronadate. Again, hope I'm saying the last name right. So it's believed that he killed Cronadate after killing his grandfather so that Elsa wouldn't stumble upon his grandfather's body so soon. It's also believed that he may have killed her, to stop Elsa discovering that he had actually stolen valuables from his granddad's house, along with about £3,000 of his granddad's savings. So I actually adjusted this for inflation. It makes that around £5,000 in today's money, and I guess if he needed money for something, wanted money for something, you know, he could have turned up for work, because that's how you get paid, you know, you turn up, you do your shift, at the end of the week, 2 weeks, month, whatever, you get paid. Or I guess he could have just asked his granddad. He obviously knew where his granddad lived, so they had some sort of relationship, because obviously, you know, if you don't have a relationship, you wouldn't know where he lived. So my guess is, why didn't he just ask his granddad to borrow money, or, you know, do some odd jobs around the allotment for people? I don't know. So his granddads and his granddad's housekeepers, so Podokis and Cronadites, bodies were not found until 6 days later. So to me, that shows that, you know, those two were the only people in that house. I'm guessing, I don't know which grandfather on whose side this was. I'm guessing if it was his mother's side, she didn't visit regularly. Again, same for his father's side. You know, it seems like this was a family who was very disconnected from each other. So the next unfortunate victim to suffer Arkwright's wrath was actually his own neighbour, Raymond Ford. Ford was being bullied by Arkwright leading up to the murder, with Arkwright repeatedly stealing from Ford's flat, which obviously really, really pissed him off. And Ford was like, right, enough's enough, I'm going to report Arkwright to the police. So the fact that Ford had actually reported Arkwright to the police really angered Arkwright, which is strange considering that you're angry that someone reported you for robbing from their house. That's a very contradictory thing, but okay. So naturally, or unnaturally I guess, he wanted his revenge. So at 3 a.m. on the 28th of August 1988, so remember this is like a couple of hours after murdering his own granddad and Elsa Cronodite, Arkwright actually goes into Ford's flat. He's completely naked, apart from he's wearing a devil mask to conceal his identity. I don't understand why he felt the need to conceal his identity. I'm guessing if Ford had spotted Arkwright, he would have known pretty much straight away who he was. You know, if someone was breaking into your flat, you've been broken into before by a person, you know, in this case this person is Arkwright, you're going to make the connection. You're going to be like, oh well, I've been burgled before and someone's here to burgle me again. I wonder who it could be. So Arkwright actually proceeded to stab Ford over 500 times before he takes his entrails, so disembowels him, and he just hangs the entrails around the room like some sort of velvet drapes. Stabbing someone over 500 times takes an intense amount of energy. It is extremely hard to stab someone that many times. It makes me maybe believe that this was drug fueled, but I couldn't find any evidence to support that. Obviously, I've never experienced this, but reading different accounts of serial killers who are sort of like mass or spree murderers, I'm guessing that the adrenaline in your body would just take over and, you know, you become sort of superhuman and you have this, you know, untapped power. But to stab someone 500 times, that is extremely personal. It's sending a message for sure. It shows extreme rage and anger, and it's just insane. Like, to stab someone that many times, insane. So after 4 hours of mutilation, so he's been going at Ford's body for 4 hours. So this guy is deep into this rage. So Arkwright actually goes back to his own flat to clean up, have a shower, you know, clean all the blood and anything else off his naked body, and then he goes to sleep, you know, like any normal human with a conscience could go to sleep after just stabbing someone 500 times. So the local police actually arrived at Arkwright's flat in connection with the burglary that Ford had reported, you know, a couple of days previous. The police had no idea who they were talking to. They had no idea of the horror in Raymond Ford's flat. They didn't even know the half of it. So Arkwright was actually taken into custody and interviewed for a matter of hours before being released on bail. I'm guessing that this is in connection with the burglary. You know, the police took him in, said, did you take his stuff? You know, I'm guessing he gave a no comment interview since many people love to give these. Yeah, and then he just gets released on bail. So Arkwright goes out drinking again, a very long drinking session. This is a common theme throughout this case. He seemed pretty proud of himself that he managed to get away with murder, like quite literally. Not even in the sense of, oh, you let her get away with murder. Arkwright literally stabbed his neighbour over 500 times, was taken into police custody, and within a few hours he was a free man. And to him, I think that sent a very important message to him. That sent him the message that I can do whatever I want, I can get away with it whatever I want, and that these killings are justified in his own sick, twisted mind because he's not been caught. If he can physically, actually, literally get away with murder, be caught, quote unquote, by the police, and then walk free, that is just deepening his thoughts and his cognition to, okay, well, I've got to carry on. So, in the early hours of August 29th of August, sorry, I've just said that twice, 1988, Arkwright enters the flat of 25-year-old Marcus Law, who was wheelchair bound after having a horrible motorbike accident. And Law actually lived in an adapted flat, so he could, get in and out of his wheelchair. I'm guessing he had a washroom, which is pretty common for people with disabilities. It's kind of like a big... Imagine if you had a shower, but just in a room, with a toilet and stuff, so, he could be independent and look after himself, as any 25-year-old dude would want to be. So, Arkwright stabs Law in the chest over 70 times before attempting to disembowel him like he had with his previous victim. So, with Raymond Ford, it's quite strange because Arkwright goes straight in for the mutilation. What you usually see with killers is that they will start small and gradually build themselves up, but with Arkwright, he just did not hold back on his rage. He actually failed to disembowel him, so in complete rage, anger, he grabbed one of Law's crutches and shoved it into the wound that was in his stomach. Arkwright also gouged his eyes out and placed cigarettes in his eye sockets, ears and mouth. Arkwright himself actually described this as a punishment for all of the cigarettes that Law had scrounged off Arkwright. How disgusting is that? That is his justification for killing a disabled man, stabbing him in the chest, trying to disembowel him, gouging his eyes out. It's like, oh, because he kept scrounging cigarettes off me. These crimes, to me, show someone who does not have a normal cognition and a normal, just not normal in the brain. Like, this isn't what a mentally healthy person would do. If that was me, I would have a conversation with Laura and be like, hey, look, it's time that you stop, getting cigarettes off me, or if you want me to go get you some, I'll go buy you some. You don't stab someone in the chest 70 times as a punishment. You talk to them. Healthy adult conversation. So once Arkwright's finished mutilating Law, just like he had with Raymond Ford, he left Law's flat and just went on his way again. So this is the 4th time that he's done this, or 3rd, depending on whether he killed his granddad and then went back to kill Elsa Cronodite. So Arkwright actually ran into Law's mother and he openly bragged to her that her son had committed suicide, and he had this huge, cheesy, smiley grin on his face. So that's just completely disgusting. Absolutely, he knew, and he was very proud of it, and he wanted to be notorious and known. So the fact that he would openly brag to the mother of his victim within about maybe half an hour of killing her son just shows what kind of monster Anthony Arkwright really is. So obviously Marcus Law's mum was shocked, beside herself, and she ran into the flat where she sadly found her son and the horrific crime scene that Arkwright had left behind. So obviously police caught up with him pretty quickly after Law's mum obviously told the police about what had happened. She had obviously phoned in the crime scene to the police. They caught up with him. He already had a prior arrest record for the burglary, and obviously going back to, his probably very, very long petty theft and crime list. So pretty much straight away he confesses to all 4 murders. He's pretty proud of it, he's not out to hide anything, he's not out to act innocent, he just straight up confesses to police. And with his cooperation, the police were actually able to recover the bodies of the other 3 victims, so his granddad's housekeeper, and Raymond Ford. At this point, Arkwright felt like he was losing control over the case, and he was losing the control that he craved and needed so bad. So he actually makes up a fifth victim to keep the attention on himself, to keep the police searching and poking and prodding, and just to sort of highlight himself as like, I'm such a bad guy, and he just really wanted attention. So Arkwright was actually held in Her Majesty's Prison Hull while he was awaiting trial for the 4 murders. It can take quite a while for such a huge case to go to trial, obviously. Prosecution need to prepare their case, the defence needs to prepare their case, Arkwright needs time to find a lawyer. If he can't find a lawyer, especially in the 80s, one would have been provided for him, which is actually a service that the Conservative government have scrapped. So if you can't afford a lawyer, well, tough shit. You're going to have to find the money, because the government will no longer allow you legal aid, that's the word. They will no longer help you with that. So Arkwright actually smeared his own cell walls with his own feces, which is called a dirty protest. Really counterproductive, because you have to sit in a cell that smells like your own shit. Obviously someone has to come in and clean it. Prisoners usually do this and then cover the windows and stuff with newspaper. I'm guessing they do it to cameras now as well, since a lot of prisoners are often put on suicide watch when they're awaiting trial. Yeah, extremely counterproductive in my mind, especially if you share a cell with someone, because then you have to deal with the other person who's complaining that the cell smells like shit, and you're covered in shit, and it's just not nice, is it? He said that he did this because he didn't feel he had the notoriety nor the attention that he deserved. Again, smearing your own shit over your own cell wall, not really the way to go about it, is it? So he actually managed to convince prison officials that he was insane. I don't think they needed much convincing about that. So they actually transferred him to the Rampton Hospital in Merseyside, which is the sort of Liverpool way, past Manchester, towards that way. However, upon his arrival, psychiatrists at the hospital actually turned around and said, "No, you're pretty sane. You're just an evil guy," and he was able to stand trial. So one staff member at the Rampton Hospital actually went so far to say that Arkwright was the sanest person in the building. I'm not sure about the conclusion, but I'm not a mental health professional, so there we go. So in July of 1989, so this is like almost a year after his murder spree, Arkwright stood trial at the Sheffield Crown Court, which is where I'm from. I've walked past this Crown Court thousands of times, and I've never heard about this case. I've never realised that I've walked past a Crown Court that has held a trial for such a horrific monster, and I think a lot of people who live in the area have never heard of this guy, which is exactly the opposite of what he wanted, but it's what he deserves. So he actually pled guilty to murder and was charged with life imprisonment. So the judge presiding over the case commented that Arkwright was, quote, "an evil fantasist who had a desire to be as famous as Jack the Ripper," quote, or unquote. It's also important to note that during the trial of his murder, not his murder, the trial that he was standing for murder, apologies, that the murder of Chronodite would not be conclusively linked to Arkwright. The judge orders that her murder would lie on his file, so this is actually a feature in British law. I'm not sure about US law, but a crime can be linked to a person, held on their record, but it's not within the public interest to proceed. So say if in this instance Arkwright had Chronodite's murder on his file, if he comes up for parole in X amount of years, what the CPS or Crown Prosecution Service will do is they will look at his file and go, "No, actually, we're going to take you to court for the murder of Elsa Chronodite." It's to ensure that people like him never get released back into the general public ever again. It's pretty much for that. So, Arkwright was issued with a whole life tariff, which some argued was inhumane and against his human rights. Apparently they're not considering the human rights of Arkwright's victims at all. So Arkwright's original sentence was actually a 25-year minimum sentence for the 4 murders. Not sure why it's stated as the 4 murders, because he's technically convicted of 3. 4 lie on his file, so I guess that's maybe where the confusion comes from. So in the 1990s, the Home Secretary actually went, you know what? We're going to upgrade this to life without parole. This is something that only the Home Secretary can do. Not even the judge of the highest court in the land can upgrade your sentence to life without parole. It's not a hugely common sentence in the UK, to most people's disgust. But I know it's pretty common in the US, but I know that there has been some issues with the European courts of human rights, Human Court of Appeal, I believe. Anyway, so Arkwright actually became the youngest person in the UK to ever be given a whole life tariff without the possibility of parole, and he was just 21 years old when this happened. So you have to remember that he is 21 years old when he goes on a 56-hour murder spree, and then in the simultaneous time becomes the youngest ever person in the UK to be given life without parole. And at 21 I'm 22 now, so similar age, to be told that you are going to serve life without parole, that's terrifying. Your whole life, your life has barely started at 22. I know in the US there's been some controversy over sentencing minors to life without parole. Not gonna get into that right now about my personal opinion, but yeah, that's terrifying as a 22-year-old thinking that, well, my life has just begun and now it's gone, but it's what he deserves. I mean, he deserves way worse, but it's the justice we're able to give his victims. So Anthony Arkwright is currently serving his sentence in His Majesty's Prison, Wakefield. Sorry, Her Majesty's Prison, Wakefield, not His Majesty. The Queen's not dead yet. So yeah, he's serving it in HMP Wakefield, which is actually home to some of the UK's most dangerous and depraved criminals. There are a lot of nasty, dangerous people at Wakefield. So I hope, for everyone's sake, that they all live in solitary confinement, because there's no way that people like this should be allowed to be in population with each other. But yes, so that was episode 3. I hope you enjoyed it. This is, I'm kind of gaining my confidence now, sort of a bit more ad-lib than I usually do, but I kind of wanted to bring a more personal feel to the podcast. Didn't just want to sit here and read words off a screen and be like, I am very robotic. But yes, thank you for listening, stay safe and stay spooky.